Sorry about that. Are we all back in?
Yeah, I have you. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. All the internet over here is not too great. So one of those key parts to one of those key parts to farming is to being self-reliant, and so seed saving helps bring in that full circle. And if we look at today, many of us are farmers and gardeners are buying most of our seeds from outside sources or seed companies. And this is a new phenomenon. Only in the past 100 years, we've just begun buying our own seeds from other people. And because of this, we've traded our money and gained a little bit of time, all for the sake of a couple of conveniences. But in that, we've traded away some of our independence, a lot of our independence. Another reason to grow out your own seeds is to protect biodiversity. Let me see if I can pull up I got it. I need a knife though. Let me pull up this sheet very quickly. Mm-hmm. Let me try to do the screen share. There we go. So we've lost a lot of our biodiversity by relying on seed companies to produce seeds from us. Normally we would all be doing our own thing, and since we're all individuals, there's a higher chance of diversity. But since seed production has been privatized, for the most part, many of the seeds listed here are controlled by 5 large companies. And so they make decisions based on what's feasible for them as a business, and thus limiting the amount of seed variety that's available to us as farmers and gardeners. And so we can reclaim this by growing some of our own seeds and developing some of our new types of plants, types of varieties. And also, we can, it's important to save seeds because we can start to select things for different types of characteristics, from taste to size to to breeding.
Acclimation of the plant.
Sorry about that. And so when we're breeding our own seeds, we can kind of tailor that seed to the characteristics that we want. And typically when seed companies are breeding out seeds and selecting seeds, they're doing it for processes that help them, that aren't related to really taste. They're more related to the production side of seeds. So they might be growing out of seed to get a uniform growth, or making sure that all the tomato plants on that variety ripen at the same time, because that's easier for them to manufacture, and for them to also to working with their logistics. And also a really important part to saving seeds is the ability to, when you save seeds, your seeds I'm trying to get the right word for this. They capture, or they reflect the environment around them. And so when you grow a bean seed in your neighborhood, that bean seed learns how to develop well inside your neighborhood. So when you're saving that seed each year, it's getting better and better at growing in that area. And when you're buying seeds from producers or vendors, you're buying a seed that grew well in Arkansas or Washington, for example. And when you go and try to plant it in Michigan, it might not do as well as it would if it was grown in your home place. All right, so I do see a couple of questions on here, but I'll get to those in the lesson once we get there. But those are a couple of reasons why we save seeds, and there are numerous more. All right, so let's get into the bulk of the lesson. All right, screen sharing. All right. So we'll be talking about the basics of vegetable seed saving here. We'll be mostly focusing on crops that we give out in the Garden Resource Program. So things like stone fruits like apples or pineapples, those things won't be covered here. I have linked a Google Share document that contains all of the PowerPoints and documents I'll be referring to in this class so that you all can follow along in your own time. If you do want to get into depth with seed saving, I recommend that you all go out and purchase this book, Seeds to Seeds by Suzanne Ashworth. This book will definitely help you get into the more in depth about seed saving. All right. Checking the chat here. Thank you, Keto, for posting that. So let's see.
Excuse me, Akella.
Yeah.
Can you make your can you go to full screen on the PowerPoint so you get the full slide on the screen?
Yeah, gotcha. All right. Okay. So knowing what to grow. Now, a lot of us are used to planning for, a regular vegetable season. When you're planning for seed saving and trying to incorporate that into your crop rotation, you have to take into account that your seeds, that those plants are going to be inside of that ground a little bit longer. And sorry about that. And so that's just one of the nuances of saving seeds. Oh, sorry, this must be in presentation mode, or I can't control it. One moment. Okay. So in this PowerPoint, it kind of outlines a kind of, oh, sorry about these technical difficulties. One moment. All right, here we go. Sorry, I had it on play mode.
No, I think that was when, sorry, Akella. I wonder if the one on the far right makes a difference. The little looks like a projector screen.
Yeah, that one was the one I had on first. Haven't experienced this before where it just plays by itself. It's weird. But if it moves, I'll just move it back. Yeah, it's still moving by itself at a pretty fast rate.
You know what? Maybe just go to the slides and for expediency. Okay.
Yeah, don't want to spend too much time on this. So know what to grow. In this PowerPoint, it kind of it's a summarization of a from the Seed Alliance PowerPoint, and in this one, it's geared towards beginner seed savers. So I'll be going through this PowerPoint here, but I'll be going into depth into more of the ideas behind each of the slides, and then breaking down things that I see that are important to seed saving for beginners. And so we recommend that you start with open pollinated seeds. So normally when you're buying seeds on a seed packet, you'll see things like heirloom seeds, open pollinated seeds, or hybrid seeds, or you might see a sign that says F1 or F2. F1, F2 are just hybrid seeds, and you might see OP for open pollinated seeds. Hybrid seeds, they're pretty much just first generation seeds. And so that means that they're pretty much new, a new species in a way. And open pollinated seeds are seeds that are kind of like dog breeds. They've been around for a long time. They have very distinctive characteristics. And we recommend that you start with growing these out for seed saving, because if they breed true when you have them seeded next to other plants. Heirloom seeds are just even older open pollinated seeds, so they're very easy to start seeds from. Think about hybrid seeds, because they're new, they lack the characteristics to really breed true. So when you plant a hybrid plant, that plant might lack the characteristics of the plant what you started from. And so that fruit that came from that hybrid pepper plant might look a little bit different, might taste different, might grow differently. And you might run into that problem when you're saving seeds from a hybrid plant. And also, yeah.
Excuse me, Akela. Can I help
Yes.
elaborate a little bit?
Yeah.
So with hybrids, it's basically crossing two distinctly different varieties to get the resulting fruit that is desirable for whatever reason. Let's call it, pink spotted peppers, whatever, right? So there's a pink pepper and there's a red and there's a spotted pepper, and they cross those, the parentage, they pollinate from one to the other to get the resulting fruit. And that first generation, like Akela was saying, the new generation, you can only have that result by that cross from those parentage the first time. And if you try and save seed from that fruit, the genetic diversity is all mixed into that pink spotted pepper, which the children of that could be varied, because the genetic pool is really intense. Whereas the OPs or the heirlooms are genetically stable. They've been saved, year after year after year, and so there's no more variance on the product.
And another issue that comes about with hybrid plants, many of them are patent. And so you don't know those parent plants of that hybrid plant, so that you could make your own and get that hybrid plant again. And so that's one of the issues that people have with hybrid plants, because they're owned by some type of seed company who controls the rights of that seed. And so that's another reason why it's iffy to continue to buy hybrid plants. You're always going to have to purchase hybrid plants to get that same type of crop. And that ends up affecting the biodiversity within nature. And so we recommend starting with open pollinated plants and seeds, because they breed true to type. All right. So within those hybrids and heirlooms and open pollinated seeds, you have, you get three different types of plants. You have your annuals, biennials, or perennials. So with annuals, that basically means that seed is going to seed again, reseed itself in that same year. Biennial means that it needs to go through a winter in order to seed, and then
Hi guys. Well, we lost Akello for a second here. I'm sure he's trying to log back in, so please be patient. We'll just uh, give it a sec to see if where he's at.
Yeah. All right. Back on, everybody. Sorry about that. All right. All right. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
All right. My apologies. So we'll be going through breaking it down, some of our annual and biennial crops. So you definitely need to learn about the species of the plants that you are working with. And let me see, I'm gonna try to. So when you're going through planting your plants, if you, well, we don't have this on the KGD seed packets, but typically when you're buying a seed packet from a company, they typically list the species name of a plant. And let me try to pull that up. And so here, for example, is just listing some of the plant crop and species and family name. So when you're saving your seeds, when you're planting out your plan, where you're going to plant your plants, let's say, for example, you have something like broccoli that you're going to plant. What you need to know is the species and the family name of that plant. And so broccoli is in the Brassica family, and it's a Brassica oreaceae. And so plants that are within the same species, they can cross with each other. So if you go down this list, let's take a look at Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are in the Brassica family, and they're also a Brassica oreaceae, and forgive me for slaughtering that name. These are all in Latin, and so they use Latin because the Latin names are recognized by the botanist community. And when you're going by the common name of crops, it doesn't really share the specific details of that crop in relating to its genetics and its species. And so a lot of mistakes can happen when you're trying to save your seeds and you don't know the species name of that plant. You could end up crossing your Brussels sprouts and your broccoli together. Like, even though they have different names, broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and you're like, oh, that's fine, they could be planted right next to each other and I could save seeds from them. If you do that and they both seed, then you'll be getting a cross between your broccoli and your Brussels sprout plants, and your seed won't be true to what you're trying to save seeds from. And so,
Can I add one more point to that?
yeah.
The other layer to that would be that they flower at the same time.
Mhm.
So like the crossing happens when the things are flowering. If this is more common with some of the things that are like melons and squashes, because they're flowering all summer long, and if they're in close proximity, that could be an issue for that reason. But as the example goes, if it turned out that those broccoli were flowering at the same time as those Brussels sprouts, that would be part of the problem.
And we could talk about some of the ways that you can isolate your plants and a couple of practices that you can do to kind of mitigate plants from crossing. But for an example, or when you're going through and planting your plants, just make sure that you use this list to try to list the different types of species that you have on your growing list. And this is an excellent list because it kind of lists the things that you need to be aware of when you're growing out your plants. So let's stick with the example of broccoli. Let me try to find it again on this list. So we got our broccoli. This list tells us that it's a biennial. And so that means that it needs to go through a vernalization process, meaning that it goes through a cold period. And then also, sharing pause, sorry about that. And then also insects pollinate this plant. And this one is a key point. So let's say, for example, you planted the broccoli right next to those Brussels sprouts. This right here lists the isolation distance, the recommended isolation distance between two plants. And so this sheet recommends that you have 800 feet between your broccoli, between the next brassica in that same species. And we'll talk about ways to get around that, but doing some isolation practices that involve bagging your plants or wrapping them up. But this is the recommended isolation distance between those plants to limit cross-pollination. And I'm going to go through this sheet just to make sure that you all know how to read this and use this sheet. Yes. So we'll talk about isolation practices in a moment and go into depth with those. All right. So the viable seed. So this part right here means that you basically need 5 broccoli plants next to each other to produce a viable seed amongst those plants. So like this is the least amount of broccoli plants that you should plant around each other. And in order to maintain the variety, this list right here says 20 to 50 plants are needed to maintain the vigor of the plant so that you don't lose genetic characteristics of that broccoli plant. So like, for example, like, if you got 5 plants planted around each other, like that's good for like 1 year. But if you keep planting your broccoli plants with just 5 plants around them each year, moving to the next season, you're gonna start to lose a lot of the characteristics of that plant. And so this is really for like genetic preservation. So planting 80 broccoli plants around each other will help preserve its genetics for years to come. And so, but like being realistic on a urban gardener scale, like 800 plants between your brassicas, and brassicas have about 7+ different species. The Brassica oreaceae has 7 different species amongst them, and many of those are common plants within urban gardens. And so it's a bit of a challenge to save those plants, especially if you're doing 800 feet, spacing between them. And so we definitely need to put into practice some isolation practices to protect those plants from crossing.
Or just grow,
Or just grow one plant.
just expect that you're going to grow just,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing to be clear here is that the biennials probably are not if you're just getting started with seed saving, don't go with the biennials, because that's another thing that you have to manage, is trying to keep this thing alive through the winter months. Yeah. All the annuals are a lot easier because you're going to get that seed within the growing season. Like we if we're lucky if we can get collards or kale or broccoli to overwinter, but it's not a guarantee. But yeah, I mean, or breaking it down, but like simply put, like on a garden scale, just don't make sure that you don't have any collards or other cousins of broccoli in the vicinity, and you're probably going to be fine.
Yeah. Yes, great point, Keto. One of the things that you need to be aware of when you're starting to save seeds, the plants that you're planting within your garden. So like how many Brassica oreaceae do you have within your garden? You also need to be aware of the types of weeds that are within that area. So a couple of weeds might share the same family as the Brassica oreaceae, and you might end up crossing with some of those weed seeds, and that can affect your the plant that you're saving for. And you also need to be aware of what your neighbors are growing. So your neighbors could be growing a different type of Brassica that could affect your seed stock. But some of and I'll definitely go into breaking down, like I'm going to talk about, in my examples, talk about saving seeds for beets in my example, and then also doing a type of lettuce that I'll break down step by step. And then I'll also be talking about doing a wet seed. So I'm going to talk about beets, a type of lettuce, and then a cucumber that will be breaking down in our example for a step by step. But I want to show this diagram to kind of show you all. Let me see if I can find it. That one's not good. Well, let's switch over to the PowerPoint. But before we do that, so like this sheet right here, it pretty much is going to help you break down like the basic things that you need to know from like species, which is immensely important, and then also the life cycle of that crop. And if you take time to look at it, you can kind of see a pattern here where annual crops and, the self-pollinating crops need less space and also less plants for you to successfully save seeds from. So that's why they're a lot easier. And if you go and look at the insect crops or crops that need wind and that are also biannual, they need a lot more space and they need a lot more plants to stay genetically, to preserve their genetics. And so we definitely recommend starting with annual crops first. And let me get back to the PowerPoint.
And just to note that the book that Akela referenced earlier, Seed to Seed by Susan Ashworth, that is basically like a reference book, like it's kind of like a seed catalog, but it breaks down all the fruit and vegetable varieties, and then you can go at the subcategory, and it gives you specific instructions similarly to that spreadsheet that Akela was just referencing. So it's a really good, like, if you want to get into the specifics, because there's kind of fine specifics on some of these things, and it's a good reference manual for that.
Like, for example, there's just like one complex thing, like nighttime hand pollinating, like specific types of squash varieties, because they're pollinated normally by an insect, and that nighttime insect is a moth. And so you need to hand pollinate that during a specific time. And so seed saving can get pretty scientific and intense. So learning about those species are going to help you maintain that breeding, excuse me, I'm forgetting the term. Make sure that that seed breeds true when you grow out and save it. So plan for seed saving. So we definitely recommend that you start with easy plants. So like annual plants, which are self-pollinating. And they're easy because they require no isolation, so you can do them on a small scale. And they also require only a couple plants to reliably reproduce seeds. And so, sorry, I gotta move this screen. So grow enough plants. And when you're growing plants out, let's say, for example, you want to grow something like a radish. There are some annual radishes out there that exist. Let's say you broadcast those radish seeds out in the field. There are a couple of things that you want to pay attention to as those radish seeds are growing. So like one, you already know the species name. Let's say you kept track of how many seeds you set out there and that you began with. And this is going to help you figure out like the germination rate of those crops. So your radish seeds are starting to grow. They're starting to germinate. You want to keep track of how long it takes those radish seeds to germinate. The ones that germinate the quickest are ones that you're going to be paying attention to, because that means that radish seed has a lot more vigor than those other seeds. And that's going to be a desirable trait that you would want to keep with your radish plants. The radish plants that take too long to germinate are going to be less desirable, and that's a sign of a seed that you don't want to save seeds from. So if it's taking a long time for it to germinate and it's being beat out by other plants, you will want to thin that radish plant out. And also thinning is just another term for roguing, which is used by seed savers. So roguing, it's basically thinning your plant until it's ready for it to be harvested. And so roguing happens at different phases of the plant's life cycle. And so as that radish seed is growing, you're going to start to look for different characteristics. You're going to start to look for the size of that stem of that radish plant. Is it thin? Is it growing upright? Is there discoloration? Does it look good to you? So there are some kind of some things that the plant will just tell you, and things that you can just see. Like you can tell a healthy looking plant from an unhealthy looking plant by just looking at it, and you have to have that, I guess a primal understanding of like what looks good and what doesn't look good. And so when you're going through and selecting what plant to rogue or what plant to thin, you're going to be taking out those undesirable characteristics of that plant, or those plants that display those undesired characteristics, excuse me. And so you're going to be looking for vigor and germination. And so you're going to do this, and you want to make sure that when you're thinning your plants that you don't take out too many plants, because remember that plants, they need to have a certain amount around them so that they breed true and that they can cross within each other. And you're gonna do that until your plant starts to seed. Um, there's another practice that happens with radishes that are annual. So when you thin them, you might thin them like super tightly with each other. And then as you're thinning, more space is being made between them. And and in some cases, when we're planting for harvest, we sow our seeds at certain spacings. So like radishes, when you're growing them for harvest, you might ultimately space them out at 3 to 2 inches apart. That might not be ideal for growing your radish seeds out for seed saving. And so you might want to take your radish seeds once they're a little bit more developed and space them out a little bit more, like just gently uprooting them and then replanting them at a wider spacing apart from each other so that they have more access to space and more access to nutrients within your soil so that they grow grow a little bit better and that the seed does a little bit better. So there are some different practices that you have to do when you're growing your plant for seed saving versus and not for just for harvest. A lot of the plants that we grow for harvest, we're harvesting them when they're immature. Plants that we're harvesting for seeds, we're harvesting those when they're mature.
Can you give some examples of that, Akela?
Some examples of that includes tomatoes, cucumbers. And so when we're harvesting tomatoes, we like them to be a little bit firm. But and also there's a couple of differences too. So some seeds, some plant types, we harvest them when their fruit is immature and we eat that when they're immature. Some crops we just harvest when the fruit are mature. And that's a lot of our summer plants that we eat when they're mature. And then we eat some crops that are immature, like our winter crops like carrots, broccoli, collards, and such. But taking it, that kind of exists in the same way with seed saving. Excuse me. So like with our fruiting crops, if we harvest those too early, say a tomato, then those seeds within that tomato won't be good for seed saving. In some cases, they just might not germinate. And so when you're harvesting a tomato, you might want to let that ripen on the vine for a couple more weeks. But one thing that you want to watch out for, it's okay that the tomato matures, it might get a little bit more softer, but if that tomato plant starts to mold or show signs of disease, then you shouldn't save seeds from that tomato. So it's natural that the tomato starts to get a little bit older looking, and that's perfect for the seed. And another example of that is the something like a cucumber. Like this is a immature cucumber right here, but if I let it stay on the vine, it's gonna start to yellow, it's gonna get a little bit more bigger, and the seeds are gonna grow bigger. Like right now, this cucumber, the seeds are super small and not very good for seed saving, but I'll let this stay on the vine for a couple more weeks. And the seed is gonna start to yellow some, the seeds are gonna get bigger, and then I would harvest seeds from an adult cucumber plant. But you see that a lot more in some of the fruiting crops. So like things like eggplant, you will let that go a little bit longer. It would start to brown some. The purple eggplant brown. The white eggplant, they start to turn a little bit yellow and green. Things like our winter squash, you just let those stay on the vine a little bit longer. Cucumbers, excuse me, pumpkins too. With a lot of fruiting crop, if you're saving seeds from them, let them stay on the vine a little bit longer. If you are something like a market grower with crops like tomatoes, let's say, for example, if you're still like harvesting your plant, pardon me, when you're, I want to make this point. When you're growing your plant, when you're like trying to eat those food, also sometimes sell those foods and also seed save, you need to divide your space between those crops that you're going to eat right now, those crops that you're going to eat right now, then also maybe sell, and then crops that you're going to save for storage. But you also need to save space for the crops that you're going to sell, that you're going to save seeds from. So that might look something like a 50, 30, 20 split. And one thing that we need to learn about seed saving is that from this one cucumber, there could be somewhere between 20 to 50 seeds within this one cucumber if I let it grow big. So although we might not have a lot of space for growing, for seed saving within an urban setting, you know, vegetables, they've kind of figured out that part for us because a lot of seeds are produced within a fruiting crop or within one vegetable. Like for example, a watermelon could have anywhere between 100 seeds in them if we let them get to full maturity. And so, you know, for us to get a really good seed storage from, let's say from a brassica plant, you could get thousands of seeds from a single brassica plant. Like that's not one thing that we need to worry about if we're not worried about getting a lot of seed stock. So seeds have learned to maximize their growing, their seed producing potential. And one thing that I also want to mention is with genetics and plant genetics, let's say, for example, we might start off with a really good looking, you know, cucumber plant and it has like beautiful seeds, but that seed that we'll save plants from will be indicative of the environment it's grown in, meaning that we need to know what's happening with the soil. We need to know if there's any other environmental factors like diseases or pressures from the elements that will affect that plant's growth. And those stresses end up determining how well those genes or genetics of that plant can do. And so it's important that we have an understanding of, you know, those growing practices. You know, having good soil, good drainage is not only good for growing good plants for yield, it's also good for growing good seeds for seed saving. Anything you want to add to that, Keto?
No, not right now. Nope.
All right. Okay. And it's starting to get a little bit hot here. So I'm going to get some layer. All right.
I guess one thing to say is like, we're doing a lot of terminology and like lots of kind of quote unquote rules, but in the end, seed saving, you know, you should just try it and like just play around with it. And you know, I think we've given a few examples of easier things to try, including lettuce and tomatoes. You know, you got to just kind of play around with it. To once you start doing it, it'll become, it's not so complicated. So don't be, I guess, please do not be intimidated, and you should definitely try it.
And one tip that I want to give out when you're doing your planting plan with crops. So let's say for example with annual crops, since those seeds have to seed within a year, some of them might take like beans, for example. Beans, you need to plant them. They take maybe 90 to 150 days for them to get to their seeding stage. And so those beans, you need to plant them early enough in the season so that they reach that point where they're starting to produce their seed pods and that the seed pods can brown while they're on that plant. And if you plant your beans, you know, some people are planting their beans in June, like that's okay for harvest if you're just trying to get a bean to eat. But if you're trying to get beans for you to save seeds from, you might need to plant them a little bit earlier in the season, say May, mid-May, so that you're able to save seeds from them. And so like with radishes, for example, you know, plant your radishes for seed saving earlier in the season. So maybe like April, maybe mid-March, plant those then so that they're ready to be harvested somewhere at midsummer. If you plant your radishes in August, for example, they might not reach that stage where they can start producing seeds at because their growing season is over. But with biennials, for example, you know, some of us are planting collards in April, sometimes mid-March. Those collards that you plant during those seasons, you know, they might make it all the way through the end of, you know, that year, and they might start to peter out. But remember, for them to start to produce seeds, they need to go through a cold period. And so maybe by the time they reach the cold period, they've already kind of reached their peak in their growth. And so they've started to peter out. And they might not make it through winter because they've used all their energy and they were harvested from a lot. But if you start those biennials, let's say during July, that's kind of a perfect timing for many biennials, because by time winter hits, they're at their physical peak. They're at their at their physical peak, and they're strong enough to make it through winter and survive that, and be ready for harvesting once they start to flower and such during that year. So there are a couple of timing specifics that you have to kind of learn the flow of when you're when you're planting out your planting plan for seed saving. It's going to look a little different from your planting plan from for regular vegetable production and harvest. And I need to, Tiffany, can you grab me some water? Sorry. Thank you. All right. So let's see. Let me make sure I'm talking about things I need to talk about. Let's talk about some isolation practices that you can do with your plants. Thank you. So when we're isolating our plants, let me see if I can pull up some pictures of this. So some examples of isolating your plants can be something physical from putting up a barrier on your plants. Okay, so I was looking at a chat. It could be as simple as putting up a barrier on your plant. This right here is Remay. And so, but there's also another thing that you can do with isolation that doesn't involve space. You can, I think, Keto, you mentioned this, the timing of when you plant your plants. So understanding or being familiar with the typical flowering time of your plants is something that you can use to kind of manufacture some isolation. An isolation between flowering, not just isolation between distance. So let's say, for example, oh, you planted some radishes of a certain variety in March. And then you know that those are gonna flower maybe sometime in midsummer. And then you kind of maybe kind of a little bit away from them though, but not too far. You planted radishes, but you planted those radishes in, sorry, my internet's saying no, it's unstable. But you planted those other radishes in May. And so theoretically, those March radishes are gonna flower before those May radishes. And thus you have a bit of a distance between the flowering of those two plants. And so by mastering, and understanding the different timing, the flowering timing of crops, and I guess manipulating those, you can kind of get some isolation between two different species, two of the same species plants. But that's something that you definitely have to play around with to get familiar with. Maybe. All right. Another thing that you can do is putting up barriers on your plants. So you don't necessarily have to have like a twist tie. You just need a breathable fabric for your plant. And you could either use, so a lot of us have access to Reemay or some type of breathable landscaping fabric. So you could take Reemay or Agrobond and simply tie it around a specific part of your plant to make sure that insects get in there, or forest pollinate, or any wind pollination happens. And in some cases, you could put Reemay over the entire part of your plant to make sure that that pollen doesn't transfer from different plants and get on top of your plants. Let me see if there's another picture. Some more pictures of some more examples of isolation tactics. And you just want to make sure that this is a breathable fabric that you're putting on top of your plants. There was one other nice picture. All right, and so gets into, like, when you're using this practice, there might be some hand pollination that you have to do. And in some cases, you might have to introduce a certain type of insect that pollinates this plant, because you're isolating them from the world. You have to thus be in control of a lot of those natural things that your plant does when the seed is getting saved. And all right. So, we're going to start to get into some of the different things to look for when it's time to harvest your plants. And so in this example, talking about a bean here. So when you're typically harvesting your beans for eating, people are typically looking for beans that are nice and smooth, that aren't too bumpy, where the seeds haven't developed yet. And that's when you typically harvest off that plant. But when we're harvesting beans for seed saving, you're gonna let that bean plant stay on top of that, onto that plant, until it reaches a certain dryness. And so we want our bean to be bumpy. We want the bean to look dried out when we're coming in to harvest it. And beans are probably one of my favorite plants to save seeds from, because they're in a pod, and say you planted and let's say late May, and they're ready for, not for harvesting. Let me see.
Hey, Kello.
Yep.
You're cutting up a little bit. There was a suggestion that because your internet's a little bit weak, that maybe if you turn your video off, since we have the slides, that might help you kind of.
Okay. All right. I was just about to do that. I'm currently on the, just to let you all know where I'm at. I'm on the seed
No, all you gotta do is turn your
saving slides.
you can leave your slides up.
Which document using? Oh, okay. Seems like we. Okay. I think. Ugh. I'll just keep talking. Thank you. Oh. Man, this is like the worst. You hear me, Keto?
Yep.
All right. Sorry, I lost you all right. No, can't hear Keto. All right, sorry off for that. All right, so I'm gonna go start breaking down some of the 3 examples or 2 examples of harvesting or seed saving plants. So getting back to beans. So beans, we're looking for them to be a bit more dry while they're on the stalk. And so where I left off, let's say for example, where we're going out there, we're checking our beans, we're trying to see like how dry they are when they're on the stalk. And so let's say we planted these beans in late May, sometime in August, it might be time for us to pull those beans out from the field, because once beans reach a certain dryness while they're in the field, they start to become more attractive to pests, and also they're in danger of getting wet by rain. And so when your seeds start to dry out, when they're hit by rain, that can affect the germination rate of those seeds. And so we need to always be on the lookout for rain when we have seeds that we're trying to save for seed saving. And so we're expecting the rain. The beans are starting to become more attractive to pests. And so there are different harvest practices for saving beans. Some of the simplest include simply just ripping out the entire plant of that bean, and then taking it to a clear space where you have like a type of pallet or tarp that doesn't allow for the beans to fall through. And then you put your beans on that table, and at this point, the beans aren't quite ready to be used as like seed stock, because if you check your bean seeds, you open up that seed pod, like although it looks brown, the beans might not be at the suggested ideal dry stage. And so to test this, you want to see where your bean is at. You want to take your bean, cut it open or squeeze it in your hand. And if it's kind of milky still, not completely dry, then that bean isn't ready to be used as a seed for a plant or for selling or for saving yet. And so we need to dry that bean out a little bit more. And so you would harvest off your beans. You're going to do that to protect it from the rain, to protect from other pests. Take it inside or to another area where it's nice and warm. Typically, in our setting at a farm, we're taking our beans from the field into the greenhouse, and then we're laying them on top of a tarp inside of our greenhouse, and then spreading them out, making sure that they're not right on top of each other. And then we're just gonna let the beans sit there until they dry out. And so to know when a seed has dried out or has reached that dryness that you want it, you just wanna take that bean seed, and a test that you can do, you can put that bean on the table and then take a hammer and simply just smash that bean. And if the bean breaks kind of like glass, where there's kind of pieces and it's not too milky, then that's the ideal dry stage for that bean. If you smash it and that bean is still kind of mushy, then it's not dry enough, and that might need a couple more days for drying. And typically, we might let the beans, once we pull them out for harvest and put them on the table, we might let them dry for maybe 2 to 3 weeks after that. I believe, let's see, in one of the sheets that I linked in the PowerPoint, there's a formula that will help you get to the ideal dry period for your plants. And so the name of that sheet is the Seed Saving Guide. And, and on page 16, it lists, oh, I'm right here. It lists the, the very dry percentage that you want for your plants. So there's a couple of different dry percentages for your plants, and here's the formula that they use. So with larger seeds like a bean, you want your plant to be at 7% moisture. And if you have something like a smaller seed like a brassica, you want it to be at 5% moisture. But this is just to get at your, this formula is more for seed producers. It's not something that you'll necessarily need to be at if you're just doing this as a hobby seed saver. Simply by just testing, you know, whether or not your seed cracks, whether your seed is mushy when you open it up, will help you determine if your seed is dry enough to be saved. Right. That's one example with beans. Another one that I want to talk about was with lettuce. So lettuce plants, they're in the allium family, excuse me, the Asteraceae family, and they're an annual. And so they're very easy to save seeds from, and they're also self-pollinating. If we go to this sheet here, let's try to find a lettuce plant. All right, so this one right here is in the Asteraceae family. Here we go. So lettuce plant, it's a very easy plant to save seeds from. When you're growing out your lettuce plant, in some cases you might seed it thickly, like you're starting to do planting something like a lettuce mix, which you harvest a lot of lettuce plants from. Things that you also want to look for while you're thinning your plant, just looking for plants that don't look too good, plants that might germinate a little bit too slowly. But when you get to like your final couple of lettuce plants that you're gonna allow to seed, when they go to seed or bolt, and typically when you're growing out your vegetable plants, your lettuce plants for harvest, it's typically a bad thing when your lettuce plant bolts. But when you're saving seeds from a lettuce plants, you want to pay attention to which plants go to bolt first. Usually this is a unideal characteristics of plants that bolt first, that bolt sooner than others. So let's say you got 10 plants that go to seed, and going to seed is just another word for bolting. And so when they go to seed, the lettuce plants, they send up a stalk from the middle of them. And this is where the seeds are going to start to produce from. So let's say you got 10 lettuce plants and 7 of those start to bolt or go to seed at the same time. If you're really selecting for or trying to harvest seeds that bolt slower or go to seed slower, then you're gonna want to harvest from those 3 plants that haven't gone to bolt or gone to seed. And those are just some of the things that seed savers do when they're trying to select or keep different characteristics or select characteristics of a plant. They watch them throughout their entire growing process. And so in that example, we're just going to harvest from those 3 lettuce plants that lowest. And typically when seed selectors do that, when they're advertising their seed, they'll say, these seeds, they bolt slower than typical lettuce plants. And that's a characteristic that they'll list on the seed packet or description that they give online. So when you go to harvest your lettuce seeds, that stem is going to start to protrude out of the plant. And when those seeds are ready, they're going to be on the on the surrounding pieces of the tips of that plant. And the points of that plant, they're going to start to produce feathers on the ends of their seeds. And that's going to be a sign that that plant is ready to be harvested. And so not every single seed on that plant is going to produce a feather at the same time. And this process is called feathering. Not every seed is going to produce a feather at the same time, but it's kind of hard to go out there, every day to kind of harvest out your plant because you have other environmental factors that you need to be aware of, from like diseases to rain about to water on your seeds, which will affect their germination, and then pests that might affect them. And so typically, seed savers, they're going to harvest those seeds from that lettuce plant once it reaches 60 or 50% feathering on that plant. And in another example I give, you'll have to also do this too. And so once you have that 60 or 50% feathering, you can simply just come with a bucket and then knock those seeds into that bucket, and the seeds that are ready are going to easily fall off into that bucket with a little bit of force. And from there, you'll still have to check to see if that seed is milky or not. And if it's not milky, then it's ready for the seed saving part, which I'll get into after I go through my beet saving example. Yep.
Just a time check. We're at 2:15, 2:17.
Okay. So I'll go quickly through the beets, and then I'll get to storage, and then that should be it. And then we'll get into some questions too. So with beets are a biennial, so they also need to go through a vernalization or go through a cold period. But with beets, let's say, for example, they're just growing in the field, and then winter comes. One thing that we need to make sure that our beets are that they're at a nice thickness. If they don't reach a certain width, there's less chance that beets will make it through winter. And then also another thing that we need to be aware of is how cold our winter is going to get. So although these are biennials, winter, it kills a lot of things from insects, and it also kills a lot of plants, even though they might be perennials or biennials. And so for beets, if the winter is below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, there's a high chance that beet won't make it. And so you, as the seed saver, you need to do something to protect your beets to make sure that they make it through the winter. And in some cases, that might be putting up a couple of reed-may on top of your plants or covering them with something to make sure that they make it through. A lot of seed savers, they come through and gently harvest their plants. And when they harvest their plants, they take out the entire beet plant. They would clip off a lot of the greenery, a lot of the leaves that grow on top of the plant. They only clip a certain length, probably, I believe it's 2 to 4 inches off of the tip of the beet plant. They don't mess with the roots of the beets. And then they store them inside a cool area that's around 32 degrees. And they also put wood shavings or saw shavings. There is a one that they normally like to use, which is like cedar wood or such. But if you're just at the a smaller scale, I think that wood chippings would suffice with keeping your beets in a cool store place. With keeping them dry, so they mix the beets amongst that wood chippings, and they put them in a area that's at a certain humidity, around 80% humidity. And this is gonna matter because you don't want your beets to rot while they're in storage. And so once the new season hits and winter's over, they take their beets and they go out and replant them again. And all the details that I just shared about beets, lettuces, and also cucumbers, they're listed in the seed saving guide PDF that I shared with you all. So I highly recommend that you go through and read that, and you're gonna find the specifics on the plant types past page 20. And so they go out and plant their beets again and trying to speed through the part. Once the beet sends up its stalk, that's gonna have the seeds on it. You kind of need to do the same thing with the lettuce and look for that certain percentage that's gonna be ready. So with beets, you know, the beet seed, they might start to show, but they won't look that brown coloring all at once. And they all might not be at the certain amount of dryness that you want it. And so you need to be checking for that percentage that you would like them to be brown, and also need them to be at their dryness at. And for beets, I believe it's somewhere between 60 or 80% brownness before you can harvest those successfully all at once. So let's start with let's get into the seed storing part. So with seed storage is something that can be really simple, but it's going to be determined on how well you've harvested those seeds. So when I'm mentioning dryness, how wet the seed is it has it been dried out to its ideal percentage of 5% for smaller seeds or 7% for larger seeds. That's going to determine how well they store within your storage. And so you need to make sure, make sure that a good percentage of your seeds are at that ideal dry stage. Because if you put your seeds into storage when they're not dry, let's say, for example, you, to be short and simple, they won't last while they're in storage. So if you put your wet seeds inside a freezer, then there's a high chance that you would end up killing that seed. And if you put your wet seed in a cool, dry place, that embryo that's within that seed that's feeding on the food for the seed, that embryo is going to continue to eat at a normal, regular pace And because it's not being slowed down by something like a cooler or a freezer, it's going to exhaust that storage, and that seed won't germinate because of that. And so we need to get our seeds to make sure that they're dry, so that when we put them in the freezer, that the seed is going to last longer, and that when we put them dry inside of like a cool, dark place, that embryo isn't eating as fast as it normally would. And so one thing to check for dryness, to make sure that your seeds are dry, one test that you can do is the envelope test, where you simply just take a couple of your seeds, well, all of your seeds, and put them with a paper towel and wrap them inside of an envelope, and then just leave them for a day in that cool, dark place. And when you come back and check them, if that envelope, if it's exactly how it was and you put in, and it's not wrinkly or anything like that, then that means that your seeds are dry and they're ready for storage. If you come back and check your envelope and it's a little bit crinkly, it has some change, you can see some changes happening on the envelope paper, that means that your seeds are still wet and that you need to go out and dry them some more. And this envelope test is listed on the Seed Saving Guide PDF for you to read. So seed saving, seed storage can be very simple when you have your seeds at the very dry stage. It's okay to put your seeds inside of the freezer. You just have to make sure that the sealed plastic container that you're putting your plants in it's sealed, so that moisture isn't leaking from that container. If moisture is leaking from that container, that means that your seeds are gonna get totally dried out while they're in that saving period. Seeds that are stored, excuse me, typically most seeds last from 3 to 5 years. And those are things like tomatoes, cucumbers, brassica seeds. When they're stored properly, there are some short-lived seeds like onions and parsnips that typically only last mostly 2 years. So, and there are seeds that last like 20 years, like amaranth. But it really all depends on the storage and how they're and whether or not they're properly dried or not. And there are some things that you want to do before you go out and replant your seeds. So after they're stored for however long, before you go out and plant your seeds, you want to make sure that you do a germination test, so that you can know how much of that seed you'll need to use to get your full stand, or to get the harvest that you want, or the seed saving that you want. That's very clear. So a simple germination test. Well, what I recommend is that you use 50 to 100 seeds to get a better idea of how much of those seeds have lasted through that storage period. I say 50 to 100 because if you do 10, there's still a lot of unknown amongst that seed group. But of course, this is based on how much seed you have to use for germination. If you have something like maybe 20 seeds, I would recommend that you just germinate maybe 5 of those seeds. If you have 1,000 seeds, then then germinate 100 of those seeds to really see what they do, or germinate 50 of those seeds. It really depends on how much seed stock you have, or how much seed you can spare for germination, so that you know how much to use. Let's see. And let's say, for example, if you only have 50%, say out of those 10 seeds, only 5 germinated, then you have a 50% germination rate. And that means that you're just going to have to plant twice as many seeds to get what you originally wanted. And if your seeds don't germinate when you do your germination test, then just dry your seeds, make sure that they're completely dry, and just put them back in storage, cold storage, because seeds need to go through a dormancy period. And although a lot of that has been bred out of those seeds just through farmers for doing it for generations, they still have that in them. And so it's okay if they all don't germinate that first time. Just put them back in the storage container. Just wait a couple more months and then try to do your germination test again to see what germinates after that. And with that, let's open it up for questions. All right. So Akito, if you have any questions, can you feed those to me? I'm currently looking at the question and answer list.
Yeah, I answered a few of those.
Okay.
Should you soak in or wash the seeds before storage?
So how to recommend? So let's talk about the the soak and wash seeds. So the soak and wash seeds, those are seeds that you're only going to have to do, and this will also answer the tomato prep question. With the wet seeds, there's only 2 seeds that you need to do this with, the tomato and the cucumber seeds. So with your tomato and cucumber seeds, you're just going to want to harvest those once the fruit is a little bit past. So cucumbers, that's when the cucumber is a little bit yellow and white. With the tomatoes, that's when it's very squishy. And so in this process, you need to ferment them, because when you harvest your tomato plant, they have a little bit of pulp on them, which prohibits germination while the seed is within the tomato plant. And so if you just go out and plant your tomato plant right after you ate your tomato plant, that seed, when it germinate, because that has that natural inhibitor on it still. So we need to get rid of that on those wet seeds, which are tomatoes and cucumbers. Those are the only ones you need to do this with. And what you need to do is, let's say you can just take that entire tomato, you can just mush it up. You can mush up multiple tomatoes of that same type, put that into a bucket, and and what you're gonna do is you're gonna let that ferment amongst itself. In some cases, you can add a little bit of water to help you mix around that tomato, juices and flesh. And this process is going to take 2 to 3 days. And so as the tomato is in there, make sure that you mush it up and kind of dislodge those seeds from the tomato. And naturally, those seeds are going to drop to the bottom of the bucket or a cup if you're using that. I would use a clear cup or something like a 5-gallon bucket for this.
Well, on a small scale, though, a cup is probably fine, right?
Yes. On a small scale, a little cup is perfectly fine. And so each day you're just going to come through and check that. You're going to mix it up some. In some cases, you might want to take out some of that tomato flesh just to make it a little bit easier. And at the end of that process, if you have like a strainer or a wire mesh, you can pour the rest of that in there and then continue to wash out your tomato plant or cucumber plant to dislodge that flesh from it. And you want to make sure that you dry out your tomato plant or your cucumber seeds before you put them in storage. Completely set them out in the sun, set them out in a cool, airy place so that they dry out. And then that fermenting process gets rid of the pulp and gets rid of that germination inhibitor, and your seeds should germinate as usual.
So, and
Yeah.
to add one more thing to that, if you don't mind,
Yep.
it's going to get moldy. Like you should
Mhm.
expect that it's going to get some scuzz on it. That's the fermentation process. So basically, you squeeze out the guts, you let it get moldy for a few days, and then you rinse it out, and
Is
then you
that kind
dry
of
it.
inbreeding if you don't have them?
That was early on in the class. So
Yeah.
if you don't, yeah.
Let me see if I can answer this.
And Nikela, I think we had an example of a cucumber. Were you going to share that?
Let me see. Well, I wasn't able to bring it with me with my trip, but I do have a cucumber.
Okay. Well, thanks to Catherine who was sharing. Who was in the class here today. Thank you for, you know, bringing that by for us to be able to share in the class. It sounds like Akela wasn't able to bring it. We're open to other questions as we're waiting here. Kello, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think one thing that we could probably do keto is like I still have the tomato back at my place, the cucumber. We could do like a video and post it on our YouTube page.
Yeah, or we could do something with Instagram too. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we'll definitely still use your cucumber, Catherine. All right. Yeah. Let's see.
So I guess we are at about 2:36. We're opening up for any final questions before we wrap things up for the day. Definitely, for those who may have came in late, the presentations that are in the link that we shared earlier are really great for reference, and there's some reference materials. And I'm gonna post both Akello and my emails here if you have any direct questions or you think of something later on.
Yeah.
So feel free to reach out. Akello, there is one more question here in the list.
I definitely recommend. The question is, any thoughts on seed saving from grocery store or farmer market plants? I definitely recommend saving seeds from farmer markets, especially those that use organic practices. With grocery store tomatoes, I would me personally only feel comfortable saving seeds from organic seeds. Yeah. But yes, it is definitely fine. You might run into the issue of, since those plants are harvested for harvest and not harvested for seed saving purposes, you might run into the issue where those seeds aren't mature enough when you try to save them. So just be mindful of that when you try to harvest plants from, harvest seeds from plants purposely grown out for eating and not for seed saving. But definitely from farmers markets and organic seeds, I think that is great.
Okay. Well, with that, I think we are going to wrap things up for the day. Thanks everybody for coming out. And we'll see you at the next one. We have some great classes coming up. I think there's a few more cooking classes online, and those have been really great. sharing on information on what to do with produce at this time of the season, which is really nice. And we've had some really awesome chefs out to teach those. So we're real happy about that. With that, we'll have a great one.
All right, thank you, everybody. Sorry about the technical difficulties.